Welcome to the Wandiology podcast, where we learn and demystify astrology as a tool to gain a deeper understanding of our energetic signatures and our interactions with the world. Today, join me for a solo episode where we go through the astrological houses, and for more context, Aries through the astrological houses. So I'll be explaining what houses are and how Aries energy manifests through the houses. So the houses in astrology are areas of life experience. So basically, it's just the themes that we go through in life, ranging from self all the way to spirituality, all the way to finances, all the way to creativity, and all the things we go throughout our lives are kind of like debunked through the houses in astrology. So, for example, to paint a picture, when you have a movie, you have the actors, right? So the actors are like the planets in this analogy, and then you have the scenes in which the actors are required to, like act basically. So the scenes are the houses, right? And then you have the relationships that the actors have with each other. Those are called the aspects, okay? And then you have how the actors kind of express their energy is given through the sign. So remembering that the actors here are the planets. So the planets express the energy of the sign they're in, right? So I hope that's a good picture that I've painted. So we're looking at Aries through the houses, right? And we said the houses are kind of, in a simplified manner, themes of life, okay? So we know Aries from the previous episode to be a bold sign, to be very self assertive, self expressive, the initiators of the zodiac. And Aries initiates through action. So we look at the houses, and in astrology, we have 12 houses, okay? And every single house represents something. So let's break it down. So the first house is the house of self. So it's the house of how other people perceive you. So a lot of times when someone, for example, is like, guess my zodiac sign, a lot of times people will be able to guess your rising sign or the sign on your first house cusp, which is your rising sign or your ascendant sign, right? For example, I'm a Cancer rising, but I'm a Virgo sun. So you may not be able to realize or notice the Virgo right away, but maybe you can notice the Cancer as the first thing. So the first house is about perception. And when you have Aries in the first house, you get a very bold person, someone who takes on creative tasks, someone who takes initiative, someone who has a lot of energy and drive, because Aries actually amplifies the energy of the first house because it falls there naturally. So these are people who are assertive, they step into the world, they take on projects, and they're really good at it, and they have that outward aggression that is needed to express themselves in the first house. And the first house is very important because it's an angular house. And what that means is an angular house is a more visible house, right? The traits of this house will be very visible to people. So, for example, how you look is very visible to people. And we'll look at more angular houses as we do a rundown of Aries through the houses. So after the first house, we move on counterclockwise to the second house. The second house amplifies the energy of Taurus, right? And so the second house is about values, what we value. It's also about the talents that we have, what we possess, right? So it's about our material possessions, it's about money, it's about what we value. So Aries being on the second house cusp will mean someone who is very bold when it comes to financial matters, money matters. Like, for example, the Wall Street guys who are, I don't know, always so bold with trading or stocks or anything just financial. That's what Aries energy gives in the second house. So it's someone who can start new things when it comes to maybe financial decisions or pursuing something that has to do with money. Okay, it also means someone who indulges in pleasures, because you have to remember Taurus is also the sign of the senses, right? And indulging in the senses. So it's someone who is not afraid to be indulgent, going headfirst into exploring the sensuality. Okay, I hope that makes sense for the second house. Then moving on to the third house, which is the house of communication. And so if you've realized, the houses correspond with the signs. There are 12 signs, there are 12 houses. So the first house corresponds with Aries, the second corresponds with Taurus, the third one corresponds with Gemini. So naturally, the third house is the house of the mind, communication. It's also the house that rules over short distance travel. It's also the house that rules over siblings. Okay. And having Aries, this bold energy in the third house, it just gives you a very bold communicator, someone who can come off as quite aggressive, okay, or confrontational, right? But this is just because they're passionate in the way they speak and they're not afraid to initiate, whether it's in conversations, whether it's saying what they need, setting their boundaries. These are very bold communicators. So that's what Aries in the third house could mean. It could also mean someone who is probably gets into confrontations with their siblings or their neighbors, right? But because Aries energy is very confrontational, then burns out, it's also someone who probably will be the first to make amends or to see the error of their ways, right? They don't dwell in the anger, right? It's very reactionary. So look out for that in the third house as well. After the third house, we get into the fourth house. And the fourth house represents the home, okay? Like the roots that you set in your life. So these are your foundations. This is home life. This is this is kind of like the environment you create for yourself in order to feel safe, right? And so because we're flowing with the signs correspond to the houses, this is kind of like the house, the Cancer house, right? Quote unquote. And because Cancer is a very emotive, nurturing sign, then you get a sign that corresponds very well with the fourth house of setting roots, in that you need a home to be nurturing, and all these things. You need food, you just need sustenance, and Cancer is very good with those things. So when you look at Aries in the fourth house, you get a very bold, confrontational energy in the house of home, right, of family. And that could bring about a quarrelsome nature within the home, because you have to remember, as per the previous episode, please watch it if you haven't, that Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars is the planet of conflict and the planet of war. So when you have Mars, a malefic, in the fourth house of home, you can get a very quarrelsome dynamic, right? Not all the time, because sometimes this could be aspected in a good way, right? But when we're just taking the raw energy of Mars in the fourth house, we get a bit quarrelsome, a bit unstable, right? It could mean there's even a very protective male figure within the home that's a source of, this energy, where this Martian energy is coming from, right? But also on the good side, on the good aspect of it, it could mean someone who is very bold and assertive in home endeavors, right? In making sure things are done the way they're supposed to be done, taking initiative in the home, right? So you have to look at it from both sides. Okay? Then moving on to actually, before we move on to the fifth house, the fourth house is also an angular house. We said angular houses are the most visible, right? The most visible houses. And so you have the first, and now you have the fourth of home. So you have self, the house of self, and the house of your roots. Okay, just a point to note, because this will play later when we're looking at the aspects and transits and all that. Okay, so now moving on to the fifth house, we have the fifth house being the house of creativity, being the house of children, and it corresponds with the sign of Leo. Leo is a very playful energy, bold as well, very assertive, right? Very fun, right? This house also rules over dating, like when you're not having a partnership, but when you're having romantic adventures with people, just dating, the fun stuff, right? And that's why also creativity falls here, because you have to kind of let yourself go to be creative. And so having Aries in the fifth house of creativity, children, dating, then you have someone who pursues romantic interests, or like the people they want to date rather, right? You have someone who is very bold in their creative pursuits, a painter, a sculptor, people who go forth and delve into their creativity. That's what this energy is giving. Then we move on to the sixth house. The sixth house is the house that rules over health, okay? Daily routines, okay? And the sixth house corresponds to the sign of Virgo. We know the Virgo sign is analytical, they are critical, they're perceptive, they're intuitive. We also know that this is the sign that rules over health, okay, and daily habits, which contribute to our health in the long run, right? So with Aries and having a malefic in the sixth house can give someone who is actually assertive in their day-to-day, someone who is very independent in their routines, someone who has the energy to pursue the daily habits, right? And also a point for the sixth house and having Aries here is that physical exercise could be really good with this energy. It's someone who probably needs to keep up with the physical fitness in this sign. Moving on to the seventh house, which is the house of romantic partnerships or business partnerships. So this is another angular house. So we've gone through two so far. This is the third angular house. And it's when the first house is the house of self, the seventh house is directly opposite the first house. So the seventh house is about the other, right? So it's about your significant other, someone in very close relationship with you, and that might be a romantic relationship or a business partnership. So having Aries in the seventh house could mean having a bold, maybe combative relationship with your significant other, right? So this is when the aspects are a bit difficult. You can have a lot of tension and maybe fights with your partner, right? In a relationship context, which is romantic or business wise, okay? But in good aspects, you can have someone who takes the initiative and who nurtures your relationship, takes the extra step to nurture your relationship. So that's your seventh house. Remember, it's an angular house. Then moving on to the eighth house, the eighth house rules inheritances, debts, other people's money, essentially. The eighth house also rules over taboos. It rules over the occult, the very hidden. I don't want to use the word hidden because that's more the 12th, but the very kind of shunned topics, right? Including sex, including death. So the eighth house is a very dark house. It's a Scorpio house. It correlates with the sign of Scorpio. Actually, earlier I should have mentioned that the seventh house correlates with the sign of Libra, which is the sign of fairness, justice. It's the skills. So it's just about balance, right? And so it's about you and coming into union with someone else and having that balance. And so the eighth house correlates to Scorpio, and that's why there's all this woo-woo rep around Scorpio. But I promise, it's if you get it, you get it. Yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, sometimes hard topics or things that are difficult to talk about, but it's worth getting into, I think. So having Aries in the eighth house can give someone who is very passionate, someone who has a very passionate, maybe love-making streak, someone who is highly intuitive, someone who is not afraid to delve into occult sciences, and someone all around who is very, very passionate. That's the word with Aries and the eighth house. And because also Scorpio traditionally is ruled by Mars, so this Arian energy can tend to do very well here. Okay. Then moving on to the ninth house. The ninth house rules over philosophy, education, higher education. It rules over long distance travel. It rules over religion. So all these things that have to do with philosophy. And the ninth house correlates with Sagittarius, the sign of Sagittarius, which is a very expansive energy. Sagittarius energy it's ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is expansive. And so you realize that Sagittarian people have very big energy, big personalities. The loudest in the room. They are not scared to say what they think, and a lot of times this energy does very well with philosophy and kind of like mental agility. So having Aries, this bold sign, in the ninth house could give someone who in their life they'll always be going through mental pursuits. They'll always be researching, reading, learning, probably even teaching. Someone who will travel abroad, probably even marry into another culture. Someone who just kind of looks for or seeks out knowledge. Yeah, and is very bold in seeking out knowledge. I personally have Aries in the ninth house, and I kid you not, I cannot stop like searching for information. It's just what I love. I love to learn. I love the learning process. And so that's the kind of energy you get with Aries in the ninth house. Okay. Then moving on to the 10th house. The 10th house is the final angular house. We have 4 angular houses. And remember, we said these are the most visible houses. So the 10th house is a house of career, it's a house of legacy, right? Not necessarily what you do for a job, but what probably will be your legacy in this lifetime. That's your 10th house. And sometimes it's actually what you do for a job, right? That can coincide. So with the 10th house correlates to the sign of Capricorn, which is the 10th sign of the zodiac. And Capricorns are known for being very hardworking. They're ruled by Saturn, so they're very disciplined. They take their time and they work and they build and they build, and finally they're rewarded by Saturn with results. They're rewarded with legacy, with recognition, with, just having that status. And that's what Capricorn is about. And so having Aries on the 10th house cusp would mean someone who is very bold in their career choices, someone who just goes forth and takes the initiative. And this is really good energy because it's a house where you need to assert yourself, and Aries for sure will assert themselves. So this is someone who just is always making bold pursuits with regards to their career. Okay, someone who probably leads projects, and that. Moving on to the 11th house. The 11th house is the house that corresponds with the sign of Aquarius, the 11th sign. And so this house is all about friends. It's about humanitarianism. It's about Aquarian themes, which are friendships, community, technology, and so on. So when you have Aries in the 11th house, you get someone who is very bold at making friends, at championing for community. You get someone who is very good at championing for human rights, someone who is very passionate, because Aries is also kind of like a warrior energy. So someone who is always championing for the underdog. And you also get someone who has very many friends, because Arian energy, because of its extroverted nature, is likable. The people who will attract a lot of people, a lot of friendships. So it's someone who's probably in a lot of friend circles and that. And so with humanitarianism, you get that this is someone who is always taking the initiative to help the little people, the people who don't have power, and to help speak up for them. Okay. And then moving on to the final house, which is the 12th house. The 12th house is the house that rules over the subconscious, dreams, hidden things, hidden enemies. It rules over spirituality. And naturally, this house corresponds with the sign of Pisces, which is the 12th sign. And so this is kind of like the house where you transcend. It's also the house that rules over hospitals, isolation, places where you go and you're isolated. And so having Aries in this energy could mean that you have to keep an eye on things that may appear to be what they're not. Okay. So because Aries is a very fast-paced energy, you might not realize what's being hidden from you, and you have to keep an eye out for that. On the flip side, this is someone who's also they take initiative when it comes to spiritual endeavors, right? And this is someone who also maybe prefers to create in isolation. Okay, they prefer to create in isolation, and it usually takes a lot of physical demands for them to create, but they do their best work when they're isolated. So that's Aries in the 12th house, right? But watch out for hidden things, right? Things that may not be perceptible to you. So that's just asking you to work more and more on your intuition to be able to kind of suss out the hidden things. Okay, and that's it for today with the houses. Join me on the next episode where we'll be talking about the sign of Taurus. You can find me on socials at Wandiology. That's on Twitter, on Instagram, and TikTok. You can also find the podcast rather, on the Wandiology podcast. That's on YouTube. It's also the Wandiology podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So please go to my YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And please watch the first episode for context as to this next episode, because it's all a puzzle piece and we're just solving one little puzzle at a time. So I'll see you on the next episode, which is the Taurus episode. Bye.